In my freshman year of high school, I was well known and had lots of friends. I was very friendly, and every time I saw someone alone, I would greet them and offer them my friendship. Sometime during the year in my math class, we had a new guy. He had recently moved to the US from Mexico. He hardly knew any English, and me being Hispanic was able to speak to him in Spanish to make him feel welcome. He had no other friends and sat by himself. In our math class we had together, I started helping him a lot with homework and understanding what was going on. He sat behind me, and he would always play with ends of my hair. I sort of felt like he had a crush on me, and he was not bad looking, so I didn't look at it as a big deal. For a few months he played with my hair, and it became a normal thing. He said he really liked my hair. Towards the end of those months, he said he wanted to play a game and asked me to write down the things I loved most in life. He would do the same, and we would both share our papers. Of course I wrote down my family, God, friends, and a bunch of other things. When I gave him back the list, he wanted specific names and said he would do the same. I ended up writing my friends' and family's names. One day we were just hanging out in class, and he said, "I want to show you something, but you can't tell anyone or else you're going to have to pay for it." I was so confused I thought maybe he was about to ask me out. He pulled out a Ziploc bag, and I couldn't really tell what was in the bag. It wasn't until he placed it on the table that I noticed it was a Ziploc bag full of hair. He told me that it was my hair. He then pulled up his sleeve and showed me his arm. He had about 10 healed scars that went down his arm. There was one fresh wound, and he grabbed my hair from the bag and placed it on top of his freshly opened wound from the night before. Then he said to me, "You are mine now." He said, "I know who you love and what you love. If you don't do as I say, you will pay for everything." He told me that each of his scars represented a soul that he owns. My heart sank. He started to smirk, and I ran out of the class crying and ran to the office. Everyone was so confused. I asked to speak to my counselor immediately. I explained what had happened, and he was pulled out of class, taken to the principal's office, and was expelled that same day. I feared for my life. They found all these notes of other people in his backpack, including mine I had written listing the names of who I loved. They saw the scars and found my hair. I never heard of him or from him again. I had some bad stuff happening in my life after that, and I always thought of that kid from high school and if he was somehow connected. Until this day, I don't know if he was just messing with me or if he was serious. But I will tell you, after that encounter, I was no longer the super friendly and open-hearted person that I was before. When I was in high school, I had a science teacher who I will call Mr. F. He taught environmental science and was very tall with graying hair. He always wore the standard working school clothes, which were a collared shirt with high-waisted slacks. He had a strange sense of humor that fitted well with kids, which at first made us all think that he was quite funny. He had this strange charm about him that just made you feel comfortable, but deeply to me it also felt a bit forced. As the year went on taking his class, me and my fellow classmates started to feel a disliking towards him, since his behavior started changing and becoming more aggressive and stricter. My school was small, and my whole class size was small, so once one of us started disliking a teacher, the word would get around quickly. It wasn't until the end of the year where things in his class would get weird. He would start ranting about a bunch of random things not relevant to the class at all, and continued to get more aggressive each week. Other teachers became aware of this, but because of his popularity with most of the faculty due to his charm, our complaints were only met with the assumption of us being bratty kids. One day during our time in study hall, Mr. F came into our classroom as our usual teacher who would supervise us had gone to use the restroom. While he was there, the kid next to me needed help with the science homework that Mr. F had assigned a class period before. I was wearing a pair of overalls that were way too big for me, and they kept slipping, which made me have to constantly pull them up all day. While doing my math homework in a focused spell, I decided to let my straps fall loose and fall down my arms, exposing a bit of my sides of my waist. Mr. F paused and looked up at me and told me that the straps in my overalls had fallen. But when I turned to look at him, he was staring at me with this gross, wide smirk on his face. It made me feel widely uncomfortable and a bit frightened. I remember saying, "Oh, thanks," before pulling them back up and wanting to vanish right then and there. It became a problem as more and more of the girls in my class had started to make complaints about him, of him being a little too touchy at times. There were also weird comments, such as another classmate being creeped out after he had met their mother and said to her, "Oh, so that's where you get your good looks from." On the day of our final exams, Mr. F was nowhere to be seen, along with his son Jason, who was also in our class. We didn't know anything about him or his son's whereabouts until the day right before our school's graduation. That's when the principal sent a frantic email detailing that Mr. F was arrested on accounts of inappropriate activity. After the accusations, people at my school didn't really have much time to process due to graduation coming around, and also everyone going away for summer break. Most of the kids in my class felt bad for Jason since he was completely unaware of his dad's actions. Jason still remained at the school for another 2 years and actually became a good friend of mine. His relationship with his father has always been complicated, but I was never able to talk more on his father's case since I felt it was an uncomfortable topic for him. Years later, after I moved quite far and had moved schools, I came back to visit my grandparents and had a sleepover with Jason at my grandparents' home. When we dropped him off at his home afterwards, Mr. F was there with an ankle monitor bracelet doing yard work. He looked different and worn out, but still smiled with the same fake charm. Since I was out of the car to help Jason with his bags, Mr. F asked to give me a hug. Even though I really did not want to, I did to make the encounter less awkward. That was the last time I saw him. I found out that he pled guilty to all charges and the state had taken away his teaching license, along with him now being a registered offender. Jason has lived with his mom since, and she and Mr. F have gone through a divorce. I'm now about to go into college, but the way he impacted my life will always have an effect on me. Mr. F was not a good person, and my instinct always told me that. It's people like him in the world that terrify me. The high school I was in for my junior year was my second of 3 high schools I was in over 4 years. I switched schools twice due to several factors, the biggest of which being in constant fights, because I would have extensive depressive episodes and I had a drug issue. I had been expelled from my first high school at the end of my second year due to a pretty bad fight. I spent the summer doing drugs and spending days or even weeks away from home. The school board from my region originally wanted to expel me from every school in the region, but I was allowed to switch to a high school on the other side of town after finding out I wouldn't be able to transit to the closest out-of-region school and I didn't have any other means of transportation. I was at my school for the first semester of my junior year before switching to my third different high school. That one semester at my second school was when this incident occurred. I didn't know a single person except for one at the new school, and I've always had issues making new friends. I pretty much kept to myself most of the time. I spent maybe a couple of hours a day there mostly, and there were days or weeks where I just wouldn't go at all. There was a girl in one of my classes I consistently went to because I enjoyed it. I would call this girl Sally. Sally wasn't an unattractive person, she just gave me a really off-putting vibe. She talked to me on one of the first days I was there, and being grateful that I didn't have to initiate any conversation, started talking to her as well. We exchanged numbers and found each other on Facebook. Things were normal for a few days. We would talk about the homework, and we made a little small talk. It wasn't long until things took a weird turn. Sally suddenly started talking about how we were going to get married and have children and a farm with tons of horses. I would wake up to text along the lines of, "Good morning, my love, I can't wait to see you and smell you today," and equally creepy texts like that. I had never shown any interest in her romantically. I even said at one point that I didn't want to be in a relationship right now due to so many factors in my life being bad at the time. I wasn't good with confrontation, so I just started to drift away a little bit. I would wait longer to message her back, tried to sit away from her in class, that sort of stuff. Things got worse from there. She told me at one point that she had my face printed on a pillowcase and she made out with it every night, which I instantly didn't believe, but a mutual friend who had been to Sally's house told me that it was true. She would also follow me around the school in a ridiculously creepy fashion. She would always be waiting around corners or trailing me from 15 to 20 feet away. There was one point where I tried to ditch her by turning one corner, taking a shortcut through a couple of classes leading to another hallway, and then into one of the boys' bathrooms. I sat in one of the stalls thinking I would wait until the next period started to leave again. I felt like it was a foolproof plan until I heard someone come into the bathroom and Sally's voice calling my name. I pushed right past her and booked it out of the school and just sat in the forest and smoked a ton of weed to calm down. After that, she didn't message me at all, other than maybe once a week in the class we had together. She would text me 10 feet away saying, "I can smell the cigarettes on your breath," as well as very descriptive, inappropriate texts that I won't repeat here. I ignored these and tried to just forget about them. Things seemed to have blown over for a while until the beginning of December. Of course, being in high school still, my parents were not okay with me smoking cigarettes, so when I went to bed for the night, I would open my window and climb onto the little overhang of the roof to have a smoke. One night, I was opening my window when I got a text. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning, so of course I was intrigued. I was still opening my window as I read the text, and it was Sally saying something along the lines of, "Your house looks so beautiful when it's covered in snow." I chalked it up to nonsense because I lived on the other side of town from my school and her, and she had never been over this way with me before, so she had no way of knowing which house was mine. As I was climbing out onto the ledge, I saw a figure standing on the other side of the street. I couldn't tell who it was because it was snowing badly, and this person was standing in front of the streetlight, which made their front nearly impossible to make out. I was a little scared at this point after the text and seeing this person standing there, but they didn't move at all. I finished the smoke quickly, and as I was climbing back in, I heard Sally's voice faintly say, "You're the only person I'll ever love for the rest of my life." Shortly after that is when I switched to my third school for unrelated reasons, and I never heard from her again. Back when I was in high school, I had a friend whose aunt died in a rather bad way, and it messed with her badly. No one seemed to understand, and one day when we were together before the first bell rang, she said she couldn't take it and was going to ditch school that day. I was fearful of what she might do on her own since she wasn't in a very good mindset, so I told her I would join her. That was the first time I had ever ditched school before, and from then on it became a bad habit of mine. Soon enough there were truancy charges against me. The judge sent me to do community service and attend counseling with my mother. The funny thing is that I was being punished for skipping school, yet the counseling normally took up time that I should be in school. My mom and I got through each session acting fake together. Afterwards we would go out eating or having fun, before dropping me off at school since they didn't check on what time the program ended each day. One day after my mom dropped me off, it was during the third period of school with about 20 minutes left in it before the bell would sound to start fourth. The halls were empty and silent, no one was in sight. My PE class was going on, and I knew the gym teacher would make me dress out, even if there was just 5 minutes left of class, so I decided to go sit the rest of the period away in the bathroom closet to the cafeteria. This bathroom, for whatever reason, was unfinished, specifically the ceiling, which kind of looked like hay. I went to the very last stall, closed the door, and sat. I didn't have a phone at that time, so I just leaned back and relaxed. After a long while, someone entered the bathroom, and without a stop, they went immediately in front of my stall, as if they already knew someone was in there. I had seen no one when I entered the bathroom, and it had been plenty long enough that it was unlikely someone had stood around waiting for me. Regardless, I started to panic, thinking that I was about to get in trouble for skipping, and as I looked at the pair of shoes that stood directly in front of my stall, I remember they were black with white lace, and it made me think of enlarged doll shoes. But then they turned, and before they would even have time to take a second step, the lights went out. I hate the dark, and I started trying to open my stall door, but for some reason it wouldn't budge, so I had to crawl underneath. I rushed past every open stall and felt frantically for the light switch, which I could not find, so I opened the door before switching it on. I looked back, and there was no one. If whoever had been in there had left, I would have seen light from the hallway when the door opened. They just vanished. I walked out and down the hallway a bit just before the bell rang, ending third period. I had never heard anything scary about our school that could have been related to that, and I still have no idea what that was, but I avoided that bathroom afterwards. In the 9th grade, I would have been about 13 or 14 years old, and I had no friends. I was kind of weird, and it threw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met a guy in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together, and we had begun talking and building a friendship. He was very nice, and we had a lot in common. He came from a different elementary school. It was odd because the people from his elementary school commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted that he wanted to go to this high school because there were certain classes that he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone to eat. I thought it was a nice gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started to make some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with us, but he always declined. Then one day in English class, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. The note said, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back saying that I would sit with him, and we hardly spoke for the rest of the period. I got a really strange vibe from him. It was now lunchtime, and I saw him sitting at the end of a row. I went to sit down, and he said, "No, let's go outside to talk," so I agreed. He looked genuinely upset, and I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me that it was unfair of me to make other new friends when he was the one who befriended me first. He told me that I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me, so now that he's alone, I was obligated to eat with him. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there wouldn't be any issues and he would even make some new friends. I told him I had enough friendship to spread around and that he had nothing to be upset about. But what he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm and said, "I don't think you understand. You owe me this." I got completely freaked out at that point and told him that we could sit together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After that day, I started getting weird messages in my email. I'll never forget the first email I received. He said some very mean and aggressive things. I didn't recognize the email address at first and assumed it was some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with similar messages. He was talking about how I was terrible and all women were terrible. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed that it was weird, but also agreed there was probably some random person trying to scare people. But one friend told me that she thought it was the kid who I ate lunch with, because she had heard stories about why he came to our school instead of going to another high school. She told me that he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom got a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that it sounded insane and I didn't believe it. I was still having lunch with him on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I really wanted to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for the semester. I was honestly very happy about this because I knew I'd have a different lunch period than him and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him, but I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together. At the time, I thought it was very nice of him to say, but the feelings were not mutual. Eventually, I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained to him that he was overwhelming me and that I needed a little space from our friendship. He seemed to understand, and he didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space, which lasted about 2 days before the emails started getting worse. They started threatening my life, telling me that they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. I know I should have done that sooner about the emails, but I finally did. My mom called the police, and the police informed the school. The school looked up the email in their records and found out that it was him, of course, who had been sending the nasty emails all along. He was suspended and wouldn't even look at me anymore after that for the rest of high school, which was fine by me. 1 year after we graduated high school, he and his mother went for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. He had a psychotic break, and when the police found him, he tried saying that it was a car accident, but they questioned him about all the stab wounds and he admitted to killing her. That kid was really scary.